Welcome, everyone. So glad you're here with us today. Before we really get started, please take a quick second to like and subscribe to the show so you never miss a deep dive. Today, we have a massive mission. You're doing an intense, really comprehensive review of a highly polarizing, fiercely debated new ebook.
It's definitely causing a stir.
Oh, absolutely. It's called Male Space Recreation, Iron Sharpening Iron in Squads and Spaces by Conrad Riker. And I want to mention right up front, because I know this is going to hook a lot of you, if you want to explore this text yourself, you can grab a copy right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
And we definitely have a lot of ground to cover today, but before we dive into the material, let's establish some very clear ground rules for today's discussion. This deep dive is an impartial, objective exploration of the source material. We are not taking sides, and we are not here to endorse or condemn the author's viewpoints. You, the listener, probably already follow these cultural shifts. You understand the history of our institutions before they were captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies, so you know that the manosphere and the MGTOW movement are rapidly growing. Our goal is to help you understand exactly what this book is arguing and why this specific message is resonating so deeply right now with men's rights activists and red-pilled men. We are treating this text purely as a fascinating sociological artifact.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core premise of Riker's book seems to be that traditional male spaces, whether we are talking physical, digital, or institutional, are under a coordinated ideological siege. He argues that men can no longer just, casually exist or hang out.
No, not at all.
Instead, they have to actively build fortified sanctuaries just to survive in a society that he says pathologizes their very existence. But where does he say this all starts?
It's a really striking thesis, and his diagnosis of modern society begins with what he calls the marriage plantation.
The marriage plantation.
Yeah. The central grievance here is that modern institutions, particularly family courts, are fundamentally rigged against men. The author asserts that the modern legal system doesn't just casually favor women. He says it is actively designed to incentivize the financial and emotional destruction of fathers.
And he uses some incredibly vivid stories to try and prove this. There was one about a guy named Robert.
Yes, Robert. He's an aerospace engineer who is married for 20 years. And Riker uses his case file to paint a very grim picture. According to the book, California courts stripped Robert down to his absolute baseline during his divorce. You have this highly skilled engineer literally sleeping in his 1998 Toyota Corolla in a parking lot.
While his ex-wife is...
Meanwhile, his ex-wife was allegedly using his alimony payments to take her yoga instructor boyfriend on vacation to Cabo.
Wow. Wow. And Riker actually calls this state-sponsored cuckolding. It's a very loaded term designed to make the reader feel a visceral anger. But how does he justify that this is a systemic issue and not just one really bad divorce?
What's fascinating here is how the author anchors these highly emotional anecdotes in evolutionary biology. He doesn't just say the system is mean, he claims it's biologically weaponized.
Weaponized how?
Well, Riker leans heavily on the cross-cultural research of evolutionary psychologist David Buss. From an evolutionary standpoint, Buss's research suggests women are biologically wired to seek out providers, men who can secure resources and ensure survival.
Okay, so biological imperatives. But how does that actually translate to the courtroom?
The book argues that modern society has created a trap using that exact biology. Women naturally select for these provider traits. But then, when the marriage dissolves, the family court system takes that evolutionary dynamic and weaponizes it against the man.
So the state gets involved.
Exactly. The state essentially steps in as the enforcer, treating the man as nothing more than a biological ATM with weekend visitation rights. The provider instinct becomes his legal downfall.
And he pushes this idea of systemic bias way past family courts, right into the workplace. I was reading the section on workplace hypocrisy, and he pulls out some wild statistics.
He does. He relies heavily on OSHA data, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which tracks workplace injuries and fatalities.
Right. And the stat he highlights is that men account for 93% of workplace fatalities. 93%. He basically argues that society demands men do the dangerous, literally back-breaking labor working in deep shaft mines, freezing on Alaskan crab boats, doing toxic sewer maintenance, but then turns around and lectures those exact same men about male privilege.
Right. And he pairs that economic argument with a critique of our legal frameworks, specifically targeting things like the Duluth model.
I've heard of the Duluth model, but how exactly does he claim it operates against men?
So, the Duluth model is a widely used paradigm for domestic violence intervention. but Riker critiques its underlying philosophy. He claims the model is inherently biased because it's built on the assumption that domestic violence is exclusively a product of patriarchal power dynamics.
Meaning the man is always at fault.
According to the book, yes. This means the system automatically assumes male guilt in any domestic dispute. Riker cites cases where the man is the one who called the police, the man is the one left bloodied with defensive wounds, yet he is the one taken away in handcuffs because the framework requires a male aggressor.
So to the men reading this book, this isn't just a frustrating double standard. To them, it's empirical evidence of a system that views masculinity itself as a crime. Which really sets the stage for the second part of the book, the battlegrounds. Riker argues this infiltration isn't just happening in courts, it's happening in our most historic, elite institutions.
Yes, Riker describes what he calls the feminist siege engine. He outlines a very specific three-step military-style doctrine that he claims activist groups use to take over male spaces: infiltrate, delegitimize, and occupy.
Walk me through that. How does that three-step process actually look in the real world?
The argument is that activists first demand equal access to a traditionally male space under the banner of inclusion. That's the infiltration. Once they get access, they begin to delegitimize the space by claiming its traditional practices are toxic, exclusionary, or aggressive. Finally, they occupy it by completely changing the rules to outlaw the very behaviors that made this space appealing to men in the first place.
The Yale Debate Association example he gives is wild. Founded in 1908 as this intense, all-male logic forum. By 2022, according to the book, the group was 89% female.
And what did they do once they had the majority? Riker claims they voted to abolish competitive debating entirely because it was deemed too aggressive. They replaced rigorous logic drills with what a former captain literally described as Maoist struggle sessions.
It is crazy.
Yeah, which are essentially public humiliation and privilege confessionals.
That is a massive shift from a logic debate. And then there's the UCLA athletic budget story. He claims the university cut its national champion male gymnasts just to fund a gender studies hydration station serving fair trade kombucha. I mean, regardless of where you stand politically, you can see how reading story after story like this creates a profound feeling of disenfranchisement.
That is the crucial takeaway. For the men this book is written for, these aren't isolated incidents. They are puzzle pieces coming together to confirm their deepest suspicions. It fuels this intense, burning desire to completely opt out of mainstream society. If the game is rigged from the courtroom to the classroom, the logic goes, why continue to play the game?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Riker doesn't just complain about the state of the world. Half the book is a hyper-pragmatic blueprint for opting out and building your own sanctuaries. And I want to be super clear with you listening. This is not about building a cute, Pinterest-worthy man cave with a pool table and neon beer signs. He literally calls it the garage gulag.
Right, it's an architecture of survival, not leisure. The book argues that male spaces must run on brutal pragmatism.
But the tactical advice is bizarrely specific. I mean, a commercial-grade beverage cooler.
He insists on it. Not for hosting parties, but as what he calls tactical infrastructure. His rationale is that if your marriage suddenly dissolves and you are locked out of your kitchen or your finances are frozen, you need a high-capacity, reliable way to store enough calories to survive the initial shock without relying on outside systems.
Okay, that's intense. And then there's the recliner. He tells you to buy a leather recliner, but not to relax in. He cites NASA studies showing that a 17-degree recline optimizes human alertness. He specifically tells readers to position this chair facing the entry points of their home. Wait, how does he justify wanting to be on high alert in your own home?
It's about replacing the illusion of domestic comfort with the reality of tactical control. Riker is trying to rewire his reader's brain. He wants them to stop thinking of their garage as a place to unwind and start treating it as a forward operating base.
He even defends fluorescent lights. Aren't those universally hated for giving people headaches?
Normally, yes. But Riker rebrands them as high-efficiency task illuminators. He even cites MIT lab studies to prove that an environment of organized, mechanical clutter under harsh lighting actually boosts cognitive focus for men. It's all about staying sharp.
And that physical fortress is just one half of the equation. The book spends a massive amount of time on the virtual sanctuary. He introduces something called the Panopticon Playbook.
Yes, the panopticon is a philosophical concept of a prison where inmates are watched constantly without knowing exactly when. Riker says modern men are living in a digital panopticon. He wants to turn surveillance culture back on itself. Because, as he notes, modern divorces, HR complaints, and custody battles often hinge entirely on digital footprints.
He explicitly warns that your text messages, your Xbox Live achievements, your late-night Reddit rants, they can all be subpoenaed. He actually tells his readers to treat their living room flat screens like radar systems for incoming threats. But how does he suggest they fight back?
By building digital trenches. This is where the book dives into some serious operational security. He advises abandoning mainstream social media entirely. He wants his readers utilizing Tor browsers, which route your web traffic through random encrypted nodes around the world to mask your IP address. He mandates VPNs and burner emails. He tells guys to rotate their online handles like Russian spies swapping passports.
It's full-on Jason Bourne stuff, but applied to escaping alimony in HR departments. He even teaches analog spycraft. He talks about dead drops.
Right, literally hiding encrypted micro SD cards under public bus stop benches.
But why? Why not just send it encrypted text?
The rationale he gives is temporal separation. If you send an encrypted text, the telecom company still logs that your phone and your buddy's phone pinged cell towers at the exact same moment. But if you drop off data on a Tuesday and your buddy physically picks it up on a Thursday, there is no simultaneous cell tower data linking the two of you together.
That is next-level paranoia. Or preparation, depending on your view. He also advocates migrating to decentralized mesh networks. Explain that to me, because it sounds complicated.
A mesh network essentially bypasses traditional internet service providers. Instead of your phone talking to a centralized AT&T or Verizon tower, which logs all your data devices in a mesh network, connect directly to each other via Bluetooth or localized Wi-Fi signals, the data hops from phone to phone.
So there's no central hub to monitor.
Exactly. The goal is to create an invisible, decentralized environment where men can communicate freely without any fear of surveillance, algorithmic shadow banning, or their private venting being weaponized against them.
It's fascinating how technical it gets. But it's not all just tactical tech and encrypted hard drives. There is a deeply philosophical, almost monastic side to this book, which brings us to cultural preservation.
This is a vital part of Riker's strategy, the Brotherhood Library. Riker's terrified of digital media. He outlines a concept called digital erasure.
Which is what exactly?
It's the idea that a single activist employee at Amazon or Apple could, with the push of a button, delete or alter the books and ideas that men rely on. A digital book can be edited retroactively. A physical book cannot. So he strictly instructs his readers to stockpile physical copies of what he considers canonical texts for modern warriors.
He specifically lists Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, Robert Bly's Iron John, and Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. And he literally tells guys to store these books in physical, waterproof ammo boxes.
Exactly, to protect them from flood, fire, or confiscation. And the way they consume these books is treated with the utmost reverence. Riker describes a squad ritual called ink therapy.
Yeah, every Thursday night, his squad gathers to read these physical pages out loud by candlelight. He describes this one very poetic moment where a guy going through a brutal custody battle was reading a passage from Marcus Aurelius, and the spine of the physical book cracked louder than the guy's voice. They treat these books like sacred artifacts that must be protected from a society that wants to burn them.
And this ties perfectly into his broader analysis of the counterculture media ecosystem. The book notes that when mainstream platforms engaged in deplatforming banning figures they deemed toxic or dangerous, it completely failed to silence those voices. It just pushed these communities into highly lucrative, decentralized, and uncensorable spaces, like Rumble or private BitTorrent swarms.
And what I found surprising is how they use humor as a massive weapon in these spaces. Riker highlights a pirate radio-style show called the Diesel Dad Podcast.
The humor is a defense mechanism, but it's also a recruitment tool.
Right. To mock modern divorce settlements, the host of that podcast created a viral app called the Castration Compensation Calculator. You type in your salary, your zip code, and the length of your marriage, and it shows you exactly how much money and property will legally disappear in the modern divorce. Riker claims it actually hit number 3 in the finance app charts. To these guys, authoritarianism fears laughter more than anything else.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, all of these tactics, the encrypted mesh network chats, the 17-degree recliners in the garage gulags, the ammo box libraries, they aren't just isolated hobbies. They are all building toward Riker's ultimate macro solution, which he calls the 100-year Brotherhood Covenant.
This is where the book goes from a survival guide to a manifesto. He's not just talking about complaining on the internet anymore. He is laying out a blueprint for an entirely parallel society. The endgame he outlines is extreme economic rebellion.
It requires total untethering from the mainstream system.
He advocates for creating entirely off-grid physical compounds. He proposes establishing what he calls fatherhood bonds, which are essentially privately funded tax breaks for married fathers to incentivize traditional marriage completely outside the current legal structure in the state. He wants men to barter exclusively using Bitcoin to literally starve the mainstream banking system of their capital.
The scope is massive. There's one particularly wild example he provides to prove this can work.
Yes, he claims his brotherhood pooled their resources and bought a bankrupt steel mill specifically to run a completely autonomous all-male workforce. And he points out the deep irony that feminist activists might protest their all-male crew on the picket line, while simultaneously buying their steel girders to build their own clinics.
It's a flex of economic indispensability. But beneath all the tactical bravado, the mesh networks, and the economic rebellion, we have to look at the raw emotional core of this book. Riker is trying to articulate the why. Why do men need these exclusionary spaces so desperately?
He argues that shared struggle is the silent dialect of male connection, right?
Precisely. Whether it's bleeding together on a martial arts mat enduring the freezing cold while hunting, or sweating over a broken carburetor in a garage, he claims that men bond primarily through side-by-side action, not through face-to-face vulnerable conversation.
He actually writes that when society outlaws or invades the spaces where that physical action happens, men are left completely isolated. He draws a direct line between the loss of these spaces and the massive spike in male suicide rates we see today. To Riker, these male-only spaces are not exclusionary or hateful. They are absolute oxygen for the male soul.
And that synthesis brings us to a critical juncture. Regardless of how you, the listener, view the politics or the hostility of this book, the sociological implications of its popularity are staggering. We've spent this time analyzing how these men are retreating into these fortified, off-grid echo chambers. But I want to leave you with a different, perhaps more unsettling question. Think about the generational impact.
Yeah, the kids.
Right. If these men successfully build these parallel societies, if they raise a generation of sons whose primary inheritance is an ammo box of books, a decentralized encrypted phone, and a deep systemic suspicion of every mainstream institution, what happens when those sons become adults? Are these fathers protecting their boys from a rigged game? Or are they creating a modernized Sparta that is entirely incompatible with the rest of the globalized world?
So what does this all mean? It means that understanding these cultural undercurrents, the red-pilled manosphere men who are actively reading, sharing, and living out the doctrines in this book, is absolutely vital to understanding where society's fracture points are heading. You can't just ignore a movement this organized. If you want to dive into the primary source, look at the data he provides, and see exactly how Riker lays out this war manual for yourself, you need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to purchase Male Space Recreation.
It is an incredibly dense, intense read that pulls no punches about the history of our institutions and how this specific demographic of men views their current reality.
Absolutely. Read it, analyze it, and see what you think. And if you want to follow the author's ongoing dispatches and future work, be sure to look up Conrad Riker on Substack at Conrad Riker. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Please, before you go, hit that like button and subscribe to the show so you can catch our next deep dive into the ideas shaping our world. We'll see you next time.